All right, off season's upon us. We talk a lot about the draft. We talk a lot about free agency. In between all that, connected, you have to make decisions about players. Bad contracts. A lot of times you cut your ties, you cut your losses. A lot of times you just got to write it out. It is SNL, Landry Locker, Cody Stoots with you. And that's where we're going to focus today. Subscribe on all podcast platforms. Partake in the chat if you so choose. But we're going to go through about 5-6 players, and we're going to talk about their value. We're going to talk about how much you can save. We're going to talk about if it's worth the savings. We're going to talk about if there's any hope of them completely reviving their career as the Texans look to improve their roster in the third offseason of the Denico Ryans, Nick Caserio era.
Landry, let's start with Shaq Mason, everybody's favorite target for terribleness along the offensive line for the Houston Texans. Like I was comfortable never seeing Shaq Mason play again once he got hurt for the Texans. They apparently were comfortable putting him back in the lineup against Kansas City in the biggest game of the season. And then he just fell apart in the second half as a part of that offensive line that allowed, 8 total sacks in that game. I don't know that anybody who's watching this, nor you nor I, expect that Shaq Mason is the type of guy that all of a sudden is going to be much, much better in Nick Caley's offense and is worth sticking around and is worth kind of seeing what happens here. I got to imagine most people are ready to see you later to Shaq Mason.
Yeah, and I mean, ready to and going to is a completely different thing because, as you said, I don't think anyone anticipated that he was going to be thrown back in the starting lineup. Like when I heard he was practicing again, I was thinking, okay, this is an emergency type of situation. They're going to roll with what they've been rolling with, and maybe he comes back. Well, he's on the football field, and he's gone from awful to god awful. Is basically what we saw from Shaq Mason. He went from you put a god in front of awful with what you saw with him against the Kansas City Chiefs, and I would like to say that they move on from Shaq Mason. The logistics and the finances, I think, make it a little bit more difficult. It's a question of whether or not it's worth it. They did get a small snippet of life without Shaq. Was probably a little bit better than life with Shaq. Mm-hmm. So I would say that this is kind of a no-brainer, but I thought it was a no-brainer that I would have never seen him again before the Texans lost their final game of the season, and we saw him going from awful to god-awful.
They like him far more than any fan or analyst or anybody outside the building likes him. I mean, they have evidenced by the fact that they slid him right back in to the lineup with, mind you, he was not full practice that week. Like it wasn't like he had worked up to be totally healthy. Like he missed the first practice of the week that week. It's and they just slid him right back in there. So they like him a lot more than most. And when you start to look at the financials, so pull it up on the screen here, you don't really save that much money moving on from Shaq Mason here in the next few weeks.
Oh my God.
Look, you're already committed for over $12 million, playing or not playing. You're already committed to over $12 million. You save just over $2 million getting rid of Shaq Mason before June 1st. So I could make a sound argument that this would be addition by subtraction, that putting Juice Scruggs or somebody else in there just makes you a better team, even though the savings are not significant. Now, you get a lot more savings if you designate him as a release in the summer, but you don't experience those savings until the summer gets here. So you can't use any of that money. Yeah, you save a bunch more money, but you get a lot more in savings, but you don't get it until June. So
Texans Cap says, I don't like the post June 1st designation, but it makes sense from Shaq Mason. My thing with Shaq Mason is how much harm is he doing? Like if Shaq Mason is still around, how much harm is he doing? And I'm kind of foreshadowing. I'm anticipating discussions that we'll get in as this goes on, but I don't know how much harm he is doing. It would be nice for him to kind of, I know he's always been a big guy, but maybe just if he is back, like a little bit in shape would be okay. Like a little bit more to keep yourself in shape than you did last year would be good with Shaq Mason. The thing that pisses me off the most about Shaq Mason, and this is what frustrates me, because tonight and tomorrow I'm doing a 2-part series on the night stream about Caserio's best and worst moves. And this isn't a shameful plug. It's connected to what we're talking about here. Because I think some of the best work that this front office has done is they've pivoted at times and they found bargains in pivoting. And if you were just and sometimes they've missed when spending big on guys, which happens in every front office. But if you were gonna trade for Shaq Mason and trade what you traded for Shaq Mason, and you were gonna get what you got out of Shaq Mason in year one, and then you saw him kind of fall off, I don't think there's much shame in that based on what you gave up to get Shaq Mason. So I think that would have been a fine move. Essentially, what they did was they made a trade that was okay. It's not like it was some sort of steal that you got Shaq Mason for what you got it. And they basically turned it into a shitty free agent contract, like they overpaid one of the top guards in free agency. And that's where it gets frustrating for me is I understand buying low on Shaq Mason, but essentially what they did, like when I sit here and I say, man, I don't want to overpay for Smith in free agency. I don't want to overpay guards in free agency. They basically made a decent trade, and then they turned it into a crappy free agent contract with Shaq Mason. And that's what's frustrating for me. And then when they reward him, he comes in looking more out of shape than he's ever looked.
Yeah, he was that's perhaps the most disappointing element of the contract is they traded for him. He got extended, play unseen. And then if he had just replicated 2023 in 2024, like you still wouldn't be in love with the money, but you could live with Shaq Mason at right guard. He just fell off a cliff. Like it was nowhere near 2023 where he was a fine player. Like he just turned into a bad football player in 2024.
Yeah, and it was just really weird in camp, not to rehash it, but where you had multiple guys going up there saying he's one of the most underrated guards in the league and all this type of stuff. And I'm just sitting there like, what is going on right now? And you're kind of watching him at camp and it's like, oh gosh, like where is this going? But yeah, I don't know how much harm he does at this point. Like is saving just $2 million and taking the hit, is it worth it? I would still like to see a situation where you're upgrading, but I don't know that there's a lot of harm in having Shaq Mason around. And that's just, you've already made the purchase. This is not, if I could just get rid of Shaq Mason for no harm, no foul, it's fine. I don't know how much harm he's doing, but I do not want to watch him play football, especially the version that we last saw, which was god awful. And it was awful before that.
What would you say is more likely, that he is on the team next year or not on the team next year?
I would say it's a coin toss.
I do wonder. They have not made an example of very many people in the failure of the offense. It's been Chris Strausser and Bobby Slowick. I do wonder if Shaq gets made an example of, like, hey, we're getting rid of him. You guys might like him, but he didn't get it done. See you later. But it's also like, it's not going to be some giant shock to me if we're sitting around here in the middle of June and we're like, Shaq Mason's still on this team. Like, it's not going to be some shock to me. Like, I lean slightly towards not on the team, but it's not as definitive and affirmative as a lot of us would like, I would say.
Well, there's also another factor that I don't think is getting talked about here enough. And that's that. And I thought it was interesting because leading up to the Patriots game this year, like I was talking to I was talking to someone who I really just kind of a nerdy fan, like nerdy, covers the Patriots type of guy. And he said one of like the most frustrating things that they still bring up is that they traded Shaq Mason. And I thought about it. I was like, oh, okay. So the hipster portion of the Patriots fan base, like they love Shaq Mason. Apparently, when they went to New England, Shaq Mason was getting like standing ovations and like he was like they love Shaq Mason in New England. Like it's not like Tom Brady iconic status, but they have a special place in their heart for Shaq Mason in the role that he played from 2015 to 2021. You know who else started in New England in 2015 and was there through 2022? So he was there during the entire Shaq Mason era and saw him at his best. Nick Caley.
Ding, ding, ding.
There's always like attachments and stuff, and there's always like soft spots. And the reality is, this isn't a situation where Nick Caley would be going out and overpaying for Shaq Mason. Shaq Mason's already been overpaid for. But the guy that New England gives a standing ovation, and people that cover the Texans and people that watch the Texans get frustrated watching that we don't have that sentiment, and Nick Caley does have that sentiment. And maybe Nick Caley knows, because he's also a big Dante Scarnecchia guy. Maybe he does kind of have a grasp of how to get the most out of Shaq Mason and what Shaq Mason's about, because he's mentioned Dante probably 20 times in the 4 interviews that he's done. So I think that if we factor in that guy that became beloved in New England it has a tie to a guy who, when he was in New England with him the whole time, I don't think that that's something to dismiss, especially given the fact that the damage has been done when it comes to finances. This isn't like some sort of Patriot way bringing a guy in. The damage has already been done, and the savings is only $2 million.
The old I can fix him. Nick Caley and Cole Popovich. I can fix him. No. Other people might not see it. I see it. I can fix the guy.
You got to admit, though.
That's a great
you got to admit, that is a good nobody's talking about, though.
You're not getting that.
Good nobody's talking about.
You're not getting that anywhere else. Caley and Popovich coached the best version of Shaq Mason in New England, and they may be sitting here thinking to themselves, I can fix him.
Yes. I think it's something to at least keep an eye on. And look, the damage is already done. It's not him that caused the damage. So I do think that's something to kind of factor in, especially if it's going to be a hybrid offense and it's not necessarily trying to fit him into a new scheme.
The relief is so minimal as well that you can almost let some of the offseason play out and then kind of make a decision like, oh, hey, like we really like this free agent right guard. We're going to be able to get him. Now we can get rid of Shaq. Now we can move on. Now he doesn't have to be in our long-term plans. You can almost wait. Like you don't have to make a decision now. You can see if things play out, and if they play out to a point where you can replace him, so be it. And if not, okay.
And the other thing that I think is something to keep an eye on is I think like we'll know the second, like if Shaq is in camp and they want to make that decision, I think we'll know as soon as he trots out on the field to stretch. Like if there's a chance that we're going to see a revived Shaq Mason, I think we'll keep an eye on that.
I don't know why I'm even mentioning this, but like a revived Shaq Mason would be a pretty big deal for this offensive line. This team. It would be a significant big deal.
I think it's possible. I think he was out of shape last year. I don't think it got enough attention. I think he was out of shape. Like it's not, and I think the coaching and stuff was there, but I think the guy was out of shape. And I don't know what Nick Caley thinks of him. I'm assuming he thinks pretty highly of him based on his experience. So Patrick Ding says rolls on the field. You got jokes, but they're pretty good jokes. I'll give you that.
That's good.
But yeah, we'll keep an eye on it.
Okay.
Keep an eye on it. That's a nobody's talking about that I have not heard. That is a nobody's talking about. Keep an eye on that.
The king of nobody's talking about. He's the best. All right. From one maligned offensive lineman that has a bad contract to another maligned offensive lineman that has a bad contract. Tytus Howard. I don't know that anybody has ever been super thrilled with post extension Tytus Howard's play. I think there's been moments where he's been okay. For the most part, it's been not worth the investment, not worth the money. This one is an even rougher contract from a move off of it standpoint. He has more versatility than Mason because you could play him at a couple of different positions, varying levels of success at either of those positions. It just, the extension for Shaq Mason, it makes a little bit more sense than the extension that Tytus Howard got. The extension Tytus Howard got never made any sense. It still to this day doesn't make sense. It's an albatross around the way you're operating and moving. And it's just very difficult for the Texans to operate around it. They're kind of a year away from being able to operate around this contract.
So the extension for Shaq was based on something that you'd actually seen, where he had at one point been one of the better guards in the league, or up there. The Tytus Howard didn't make any sense because you were paying him like he was one of the best tackles in the league, and we really hadn't seen it. Like, it wasn't all bad, but we really hadn't seen it. And I didn't see any scenario where he was going to play his way up to much more than they ended up giving him before he stepped on the field. And we kind of realized, okay, this guy's not, for sure right tackle for the Texans. Like, we made every excuse for Tytus Howard. This is the question I have. And maybe it's just a random question that's being asked as we're talking about Tytus Howard. Maybe it's not. But I brought up for a reason that Shaq Mason is, I don't know how much harm he's doing here. Like, as far as being on the roster, whatever, and in some sort of revival. I don't know how much harm he's doing here. We're kind of transitioning with the Texans to where the young pups who were kind of feeling their way out and they were still kind of being somewhat aggressive and establishing the culture, those guys are going to be the unquestioned dogs at some point. The CJ Strouds, the Will Andersons, the Derek Stingleys, like, those guys are going to be like the unquestioned culture leaders for a long, long time. And eventually the money is going to match up to where they're going to be expected to be that. It's not going to be optional. The money's going to match up to that. Here's my question. So Denico Ryans always talks about two things. Two things he talks about. He talks about swarm, and he talks about iron sharpening iron. Those are the two things that Denico Ryans talks about. He talks about that to establish a culture. What is the opposite of that? That's question number one. No, I'm serious. I'm just asking. Might be random. But what is the opposite impact of that? If it's such an important thing that we hear it every time Denico Ryans talks, where it's swarm and iron sharpens iron, if there's someone on your roster that is not sharpening iron and he doesn't swarm, then what is the opposite of that? That's question number one. And question number two, what is the value of that or not possessing that is beyond any dollar amount or measurable for it? That's the question I would ask when we start getting into some of these guys. That's my question there.
Yeah, the opposite is that you pull people down. I don't know that you would say necessarily energy vampire, but if you're a net negative because you don't swarm and you don't sharpen your teammates, that's a big negative. And you can live with a couple of guys that march to the beat of their own drum, but they have to be excellent at what they do. Like, Laramie Tunsil's not swarm. Laramie Tunsil's an excellent pass blocker and did pretty good run blocking this year compared to the rest of his career. Like, Tytus doesn't do that. And, not swarm.
I think it's kind of Belichick-like. And I think Laramie Tunsil for Tytus Howard, I think he kind of, I think it was almost like Belichick-like, where maybe it's changed. He got rid of social media. I think he's been humbled by the position change, but like, all these failed Patriot assistants, they copied the wrong things about Bill Belichick. They tried to be an asshole. They tried to be a hardo, but they didn't really copy the game planning. They didn't really, they didn't possess the skills that Bill Belichick had. So at the end of the day, you were an average to below average coach that was a dry, smug asshole. That was it. Like you copied the wrong things. Laramie Tunsil can move a certain way, and he has the talent to move a certain way. I don't think Tytus Howard has that. And it almost felt like for a long time, Tytus Howard was copying the stuff that Laramie Tunsil was blessed to be able to do and be able to move to. And Tytus Howard just doesn't have that. He's not built like Laramie Tunsil. He's not as talented as Laramie Tunsil.
I have no disagreement with you. Let's quickly show the numbers to the folks. You get rid of Tytus Howard. You release him, less than $2 million in savings. Is it even worth it at that point? Who's trading for him right now in the preseason? I don't think anybody. I would look, though, and I'd look at that post 6-1 trade. If you're in training camp, and you're the Texans and you're playing Tytus Howard at left guard, and some team's right tackle goes down and they want to give you something for Tytus Howard, send him to Hobby. You get him out of town.
Yeah.
Out of town.
I do think that he's probably going to be, there's going to be a conversation about contract, like to figure it out. But again, like, what's the point? Like at left guard. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Cap and trade. Yeah. That is definitely going to happen. But again, what's the value? And you talked about setting an example. What's the bigger example? Would it be Shaq or would it be Tytus? I think it would be Tytus. I think if we're saying that the finances are the same, you already have the long-term replacement at right tackle. If you're already saying that the finances are kind of similar, and we're subscribing to, and we're just trying to talk this out, and we're subscribing to your make an example point, like which one do you think makes a bigger example?
Well, you probably make a bigger example out of Tytus.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we don't care how much money you make. If you're not getting it done, we're going to get rid of you.
I would agree. 100%.
All right, let's bring up a name here, Landry, that I've seen people, not as many people in Houston talk about this, but I've seen a lot of national people as they kind of just take a quick glance at the Texans like, they could get rid of this guy. Are you buying that Denico Autry needs to get moved on from? I don't understand any line of thinking, like especially with how much they praised him in the preseason and after the addition last year. And then the actual, like, once he finally got his feet underneath him, he was a solid player for what he is supposed to be, which is your third edge rusher, interior rusher on rush downs. And you don't save very much money and you have to replace his snaps. It's not jiving with me, people saying move on from Denico Autry.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't make sense before we see how the offseason kind of plays out and what they decide to do. It doesn't make sense. The question I would ask is, how much do they think he's going to hold up? And you heard Denico and you heard Caserio talk about how hard, and we saw it. I mean, how hard he had to work to get on the field and everything that Autry had to do to stay on the field. He's been in the league for a long ass time. And you got to wonder, like, is he going to be able to hold up? Is his body going to hold up? Because I get what you're saying, but if it's going to be like a miss half the games type of situation, like what value are you really getting out of a guy that's making, what is it, $10, $11 million, whatever they paid him? That's the only thing I wonder is how much physically is he so beat up that the value, yes, if you could turn injuries off like in Madden, would be great. But is it really there? And I do think that's perhaps a possibility.
We saw it in the locker room one time. It was just after a practice.
He just laid on the floor.
He walked in, he laid down. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah, he just laid on the floor.
He laid down.
I thought he fainted.
With like he just kind of was just.
Yeah, I thought he fainted.
I went over there and kind of looked at him just to make sure.
Yeah, I thought it was like an abrupt fall and like, should we say something? But nah, he was just kind of exhausted.
The results, like what he brought to the table, were not amazing last year. He obviously missed the start of the season and had to work back into shape after the suspension.
I like the guy. I think he fits what they do. They obviously, I mean, when he's on the field, it's fine. I'm just saying, like, the only way that I could see this is if they know that, man, the contract is such to where a guy who's not going to be healthy, we can figure out some other things.
Yeah, you save $6 million if you cut him or trade him.
That's good savings.
I mean, the question would be with how good this coaching staff is, could you take that $6 million, some of your other cap space, go find a different, better Denico Autry? Maybe is kind of maybe the way I would look at it. I just feel like if there's one position that gets overpaid every single year, it's edges. Just you could have a little drop in the bucket of success, and somebody's lining up to give you $10 million a year. So it's I don't get it. Your thought about they will know kind of what the player has been through and how difficult the season was, and from a body perspective, can we count on him? From a durability perspective as well. So I just don't see it because you still have to replace his snaps. So, I mean, Dylan Horton's not ready to take over Autry's spot.
No, I don't know if Dylan Horton's on the team next year. We'll see.
If you bring back Derek Barnett, Barnett was probably as productive, cheaper, but I'd like to have Autry and Barnett as an option. So, I want to do a quick sidebar because we talked about guards and we brought up this name a little bit. Zach Martin's going to retire. So Anybody that had designs on the gold jacket making his way down 45 South, that's over. So Zach Martin retiring. He made the Pro Bowl and an all-pro team every year except for 2 his entire career.
Yeah, he's beat down, man. That happens sometimes. And that's the other thing with like the Shaq Mason is it kind of wears on you.
When it goes quick, man. When it goes quick. Maybe a guy that it's never been there. Kenyon Green.
No harm, no foul. Like I think, look, it's the final year of his contract.
Change of scenery. Change of scenery.
No, for him personally, yes, a change of scenery. I think he could benefit from, and I think eventually that happens. But look, if Kenyon Green's on the roster and he's a backup guard, or maybe he surprises you and he just thrives in the system, it's fine. If you're gonna get rid of Kenyon Green, I would much rather see it be someone who wants to kick the tires on him, and there's someone like that's the equivalent at another position of Kenyon Green. Like let's say someone has a former first round. I don't have a name or anything, but like a former first round insert position that the Texans need, that they're kind of over, like some sort of flop there. But Kenyon Green being on the team, I mean, it would be weird. I just think from his perspective, from the young man's perspective, I think that he probably needs a change of scenery.
I like your idea of the flip where you go find another team's Kenyon Green in another position and you just trade. The 49ers did that a few years ago. They had like some underperforming wide receiver. They found another team that had an underperforming wide receiver and they just swapped them. And it was like, change of scenery. Let's see what it could do. As you see here on the screen, you get nothing for releasing him. If you trade him, you save a little over $2.5 million. So it'd be nice to find a trade candidate if you could, especially if you're getting a player back. Like if you get a player on defense back, like I have high hopes that Denico Ryans and his crew, if that player had disappointed elsewhere, could then coach that player up. And then I'm sure that team getting Kenyon Green's thinking, hey, former first round pick. Maybe he finally figures out what body type he needs to play with because he was too heavy. Then it looked like maybe he was too light. So maybe there's maybe he figures that out. And I mean, I got a change of scenery would be great for him. I just don't think it's going to work in Houston.
Yeah.
Work in Houston.
Yeah. It's not the end of the world if he's on the roster, but like this is your starting guard and there's no competition. A little bit nightmarish.
All right. And this is not necessarily a discussion for moving on from the player, but I just do want to show everybody just how restrictive this Dalton Schultz deal is to the Texans. Costs money to cut him. It would cost you $2 million in salary cap to cut Dalton Schultz. And I know that people are going to look over here at the trade column and say, oh, well, what about trading him? Nobody's trading for Dalton Schultz. So if you wanted to attach a draft pick to him, maybe. But, yeah, this Dalton Schultz contract, it got bad fast. And that's another guy. Just like Shaq Mason. If he could have just replicated some of 2023 in 2024, you might have been okay. He was just bad. The receiving wasn't as good. The blocking was putrid. I think is a nice way to put it.
Might be a little revival. A little Schultz revival this year where they use him right. Maybe they find a compliment for him and he gets closer to that top 10 wide receiver production than 25 or whatever the hell he was this year.
Yeah, I hope so. And Nick Haley obviously has a history with tight ends, and he probably watched the tape and was grossed out every time Dalton Schultz was asked to do something that he just wasn't capable of doing. And it goes back to my comment again that, Nick Haley talked about, hey, we're going to play to the strengths of our players. Almost as important is limiting the exposure to things that players can't do, which Dalton Schultz can't block. So stop having him block.
Yeah. I mean, it's very limited. You damn sure don't want to line him up there like a tackle. No. Not good.
All right. Couple of super chats, Landry. Jared M says Bleacher Report doesn't have Diggs as a top 10 free agent.
Well, I normally say, when we say Bleacher Report, usually that's a freelance writer. And you can roll your eyes at it. I wouldn't say he's a top 10 free agent either. Coming off a torn ACL, he's in his 30s. I think the market's not going to tell him what he wants to know or wants to be. And I think the two times that it hasn't worked out for Stefon Diggs has been when he wasn't happy with his contract. So I don't think that just completely goes away when you're older. And let's be honest, we don't know how it's going to go with the Texans. This isn't like a team that it doesn't feel like they're like a receiver away. It feels like they need some other things to happen. I don't think Stefon Diggs is a top 10 free agent either.
No, I don't believe so either. And Zach with a super chat. Shout out to the GOATs SNL. I think we all want to see more accountability this year and the players living up to the standards they got paid for.
Yep, that's all you can ask for, right?
Like every team's got a guy that's not living up to the contract. It just the want to live up to the contract is an important element of it too. Hey, I could live with a guy that looks like he's trying hard and the body's just betrayed him. I don't know that you always got that on some of these bad deals, just from a outside looking in perspective.
Yeah,
just like a I would agree with that. Body language expert perspective.
I would agree with that. 100%. 100%.
And then for the folks worried about you talked about all those guys, you didn't really save any money for the Texans. They can restructure a couple of deals and free up millions and millions of dollars pretty quick. So don't fret about the salary cap. It will all come to fruition here in the next few weeks.
This is a guy with the credit card debt, dude. This is a guy, you just stockpile the credit card debt, keep it going.
Yeah, if you need it. That's another thing. You gotta have it's easy for us to talk about it. When the Texans do it, they gotta have a plan for the cap space. I know some of it's gonna go to Derek Stingley and some of it's gonna go to a couple of mid-level smaller investments, but it's not ideal to just go out there and have, hey, we got a bunch of cap space. What are you doing with it? So you got to have a plan. I'll be interested to see what the plan ultimately is.
Yeah, the plan is going to be whatever Kaylee decides it is. And I think the plan becomes more clear once we see free agency. Like if they just spend heavy on a guard, it's like, okay, well, Shaq Mason's gone.
Or if Shaq Mason's gone, they may be spending heavily on a guard. Like those two may be intrinsically linked.
Yep. So we'll see how it goes. It's fun. The O-line thing I think is interesting with the Shaq element and the Tytus element. At what point do we kind of see like the transformation of the next part of Texans football? You know, like Tytus is the only guy from the previous regime, if I'm not mistaken. Weeks too, but long snapper. Tytus is the only guy from the pre-Caserio. Tunsil. Yeah, Tunsil. But yeah. But that's kind of like on the hot seat. So I think if you're talking about the message, I think Tytus makes more sense. If you're talking about who the coaches might like more, I think that Shaq makes more sense. I know that it kind of seems like the foregone conclusion that Shaq's the dude.
The kicker.
But Fairbairn too, yeah. God, he's a sensitive subject. You'll get a little we need a new kicker snuck in there every once in a while when you're talking Texans now. They're very mad at Fairbairn. Had a very solid season last year. Rough stretch, and now everybody wants to run him out of town.
Do you want me to pull up the numbers on cutting Kaimi Fairbairn?
If you want.
Costs money to cut him, folks. Costs money to cut him. You lose $1 million of cap space if you cut him. So then you got to go replace the spot. So not happening.
Yeah. I mean, kickers are cheap though. Like if you do fall in love with a kicker, then yeah, who knows? But
here's the biggest thing. Don't fall in love with kickers. That's the biggest thing.
Man, Agumbawale's been here. Someone's saying Agumbawale too. Yeah, he's hung around a little bit too. Jeez.
Well, didn't he leave?
Left, came back. Yeah.
Kind of if you get a paycheck from someone else, your time restarts.
Yeah, restart. You don't get the benefits. Like if there's a rehire, you don't get the benefits. It doesn't pick up. You don't get the bennies. All right, we appreciate everyone for coming through. Special announcement as well. We'll be doing something a little bit extra. I've been doing Boots for Troops, which is a celebrity softball game for troops. I manage against Sean Pendergast. The series is at 1-1. We beat their ass last year. They're changing the rules now. They got rid of a lot of my players. But it's going to be Saturday, April 5th at the Woodlands Baseball Academy. It's always a fun time. It's always cool. John Weeks was there last year. When there's a lot of crap talking, the MC is going to be Tyler Milner from over at 610, Sean Pendergast, the opposing manager. And I have a co-manager this year in Cody Stoots. So Cody Stoots will be there as well. So if you're SNL fans, if you're 610 fans or whatever, it's going to be digital versus AM radio. And we'll see how it goes, and we'll see how much they stack the teams, because like I said, it was a complete assing last year. And I think they've gotten rid of a few of my guys, and we'll see how it goes. But if you can be out there April 5th, come through. It's going to be a fun event.
I already started to try to find my old 70s baseball coach shorts. You know, those gray 2 buttons in the front, only go to mid-thigh. I'll get me some sunscreen on the nose, some big baseball glasses. I'll be over there at first base telling everybody, go for 2.
Andy on the super chat says, I hate to play ifs. You got to play ifs. Come on, don't hate to play ifs. That's the world we live in. I hate to play ifs, but if Stroud had an average O-line and healthy receiver group, do you think his regression wouldn't have been noticed? It would have made his life easier. That's for sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Are you saying that it's a blessing that maybe like we got to see it, or but yeah, I mean, obviously having Tank Dell, Stefon Diggs, and as you say, about average O-line, yeah, that would definitely help. That would the surroundings, I think, impact the quality of season. So sure, I think it would definitely be better.
It's pretty easy to see how a better performance by some of Stroud's teammates would have made him a much better player. Like, if the offensive line is slightly better, they probably beat Green Bay and they probably beat the New York Jets. and you could say like a healthy wide receiver core. Like I think they definitely beat the Jets if they'd had Stefon Diggs. Like I think they definitely beat the Jets that day. So yes, I mean you could account for maybe 2 more victories and maybe more. So I think that's a fun if to go down and think about. It's just that's not.
I think it's a funny. I think Big Steve in the chat says they'd beat the Chiefs. Okay, I don't know.
I mean, they were down 1 point in the third quarter with the crappy O-line and 1 wide receiver. So I tell you what, Stefon Diggs ain't falling down like Jared Wayne.
Which time? Because
either time.
Okay. Because some falls are a little bit more sensitive subjects than others. There was.
I meant in the playoff game. I wasn't talking about that.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying there were a couple falls by Jared Wayne. You got to be a lot more specific when you talk about Jared Wayne falls at Arrowhead Stadium.
Stefon Diggs isn't falling down in the playoff game like Jared Wayne did,
and probably not in the regular season game. I would say. Too, if we're being completely honest.
Probably running the correct route, yes.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Appreciate y'all for coming through. Subscribe, like, right along. Let us know what we missed. Who would you get rid of? Who do you have hope for? All that. Reminder, tonight, the stream, 10:05. Nick Caserio's 5 best moves. We'll get into the worst tomorrow. It's going to be a fun live stream. I'm looking forward to this. We appreciate everyone for coming through. Always remember when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together.
Eat good, sleep good, be good. We'll talk Texans again soon. Thanks for watching, everybody.